The only thing is making that difficult is just the hunger and a little bit slightly increased food focus that inevitably comes at the end of every diet. Because if that's the only issue and otherwise the person is, I guess, just mentally ready to transition out of a diet well, then it's relatively easily solvable. Like basically it's just like, look, like you're going to be a little bit hungry initially, but it's quickly going to flip over. Just let's increase calories smartly. You will be fine. I really enjoyed the interviews and the material that you put out. So yeah, it will be really cool to chat.
I was so looking forward to this conversation for a long time. I've been watching your YouTube channel for a while as well and been following your interviews and the content you put out. And I think I just got so interested in just knowing a little bit more about you and everything that you've done so far. What made you come to where you're at now? What is your background? What you do and why you do what you do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm really happy to share anything. And yeah, likewise. I've been following your stuff a long time. So when you, I don't know, like I think you tagged me or something or liked one of my posts or something, I was like, whoa, that's a big deal. You're a big thing. And you're, did I see correctly that you're working with Layne? Yeah, no, that's awesome. How long has that been going on?
Well, I started working for Holly and Layne about 3 years ago that I started creating content for them. I wasn't part of like the team by Layne. Last year, around end of March, I started working at Team by Layne as one of the coaches. So it's been almost a year now.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That is really, really cool. Yeah. So yeah, I think we can have a cool combo about these topics because I've seen you, like part of the reason I like your interviews so much is because you ask a lot of questions and topics that you tend to get into are those that really interest me as well. So yeah, think it should be cool.
Awesome. Well, let's just start with the first thing I really wanted to talk to you about is knowing a little bit more about you. So a little bit of your background, why do you do what you do, and what is a little bit of the areas that brought you to where you're at now?
Yeah. That can be a very long story or a briefer one, so I'll try to find a nice middle ground. But basically, I was always interested in being healthy and having a six-pack and all these kinds of cool things. So I just did a video recently on my kind of diet history, and there I told the story of how I saw the movie Troy when I was 11 years old, I think, and that was just almost this spiritual religious experience. I was so inspired by the physique of Brad Pitt in that movie that I was like, wow, like I have to have that myself. So, but even before that, I remember that the first like training plan I wrote for myself for the summer was when I was 10 years old, because I wanted to succeed with some girl in my class that I was in love with. So I thought that if I got jacked or whatever over the summer, then I would succeed. So like it started very early for me, but it was always just kind of a hobby. I never thought of it as something that I could pursue in a more serious way. Definitely not as far as like actually working with things like this. And then when I was 20 years old, I went through a bit of a rough patch. I was in college but I think those late teens, like early 20s sometimes can be a bit weird for people, like just lots of weird insecurities. And all of a sudden the world is changing around you. Like you're kind of an adult, but not really. You're still kind of a kid. And I just had it really rough. And I was just really, I guess, desperately looking for something that I could be passionate about, because I see a lot of smart and passionate people around me. And I could just not really see myself getting anywhere, because it seemed like all the things that actually interested me were things like fitness, which is, I thought it's cool as a hobby, but to actually take it really seriously, it's just not good enough. And then I was just looking for an outlet to kind of, I guess, just release all that frustrated energy that I had in me. So I started working out more seriously, at least as far as going regularly to the gym and watching what I'm eating and things like that. And I was doing a lot of silly stuff, but I was very serious about it. And that went on for 2-3 years or so. And at that point, it basically just occurred to me that, wow, like it's pretty clear that I'm actually very serious about this thing. So I'm spending more time doing it, so going to the gym and all those things, but also reading about it, listening to podcasts. Like this consumes more of my time than anything else. like, why couldn't I actually do something with this? So that's when I started doing things like completing the PT course of Menno Henselmans and reading books, not just as a way of entertaining myself or, how can I apply this to myself, but also to like really educate myself. And so I got just really serious about the whole thing. I started my YouTube channel, and yeah, very slowly over time, I got here, which is like, I guess not that crazy remarkable, but now I'm actually working with this, and I've been creating content for like 6 years at this point, which is yeah, pretty cool for me.
Are you currently working as a personal trainer or as a coach, or mostly content creation?
So content creation is basically like how I'm generating, I guess, just traffic. I don't like to look at it that way. Like, I actually really like creating content, so I would do it even if I didn't make any money off of it. But yeah, I do online coaching and consultations, and that's how I make money off of the fitness industry. Yeah.
Okay. Do you do anything outside the fitness industry apart from the content creation, or that is pretty much everything that you're focused on right now?
Yeah, so I have done something always, and it basically was the case up until pretty recently, and now the whole Cove situation just rewritten things a little bit, so it became a bit more tricky. So actually, for a while now, this has been my sole thing, which partly I'm happy with, because that was sort of a dream of mine, but at the same time, I'm not completely comfortable with it. Like, I do believe in standing on multiple feet and being a bit more stable, but at this moment in time, this is my sole thing. But for the most part, up until now, it hasn't been.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to get into a few topics that I've watched you talking about quite a few times in a few interviews that you also mentioned that you were very passionate about. And one of those that I wanted to touch base on as the first question was about body recomposition and your stance on how do you go about some of the protocols you use for yourself or maybe for your clients when it comes to getting someone to perhaps not necessarily lean into a very strict or very deep calorie deficit, but more so something that you might be able to work with them in a much more sensible way and working with like losing some body fat and gaining some muscle along the way. But tell me a little bit more about what are some of your protocols and how do you define body recomposition in your own terms?
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good question, because that's surprisingly somewhat there's still so much, I guess, just misunderstanding about it out there, whereas it's really not that complicated in my opinion. But how I would define body recomposition is, basically really, technically, I guess even just fat loss without muscle gain would be recomposition, because you're changing the composition of your body, right? But yeah, I guess the way most people think about it is gaining muscle while losing body fat simultaneously. And I think the biggest misconception that people have about this is that there is some sort of a deliberate special protocol that is designed to accomplish that, whereas there are all the other protocols for fat loss, for example, that are deliberately not trying to achieve that. Whereas the reality is that body recomposition, so gaining some muscle while losing fat, is always the goal. And we always set things up, if someone knows what they're doing, they're always setting things up to make that possible if the person has the genetics and the conditions for that. And sometimes that actually results in body recomp, whereas at other times it just results in maintaining muscle and losing body fat. But the goal is basically always the same. And then for some people, it's just more likely to actually happen. Now, I think that the most impressive body recomp protocols that people have in mind, where someone is actually remaining weight stable, so they're not losing any weight, but they are getting leaner and they're getting more muscular, like that is very, very rare. And personally, I've seen it a number of times with clients that they achieved very impressive body recomps. I even posted a picture of it on my previous Instagram before that one got disabled, and that client of mine sent me an email where he did a DEXA scan, and as much as we can rely on those, it was something like, I don't know, like maybe 20 kilos of total weight loss or body fat loss, but only like, I don't know, like 15 kilos of actual weight loss, because the rest was compensated for by muscle. Now, that is crazy impressive, I think, but that's that's still not that classic, like, yeah, you didn't lose weight, but you got a lot more muscular and got leaner. So basically, it always comes down to having a calorie deficit that's appropriate for the person, and then just setting up the training in a way that's accommodating for the person's training age and then also the diet that they're on. So if like the training volume has to be properly set up, because it probably will be a little bit lower than compared to someone who is bulking. And then the deficit is probably not going to be too large, although I would say that I think the deficit should basically always be, it should always be set up in such a way so that you're losing fat as fast as possible, but not trying to do it too fast so that you're actually compromising lean mass retention or gain. So, and that I don't think that ever changes. It's just that some people are just too advanced, or maybe they're just like not gifted enough, but mainly just not like, they're just too advanced for that to happen.
Let me ask you a question before I forget. So when you think about a protocol for a body recomposition, let's say the most common client, would you go and perhaps you mentioned that you would like to see the person losing body fat as fast as possible within the safest range, but at the same time prevent to make it too large so they don't risk lean body mass to be lost. But at the same time, when you think about actually implementing that, are you thinking about perhaps doing certain cycles of very short, sharp, that are very, very large, and then you kind of implement a 1 or 2 weeks refeed or diet breaks in between, and then you go into another cycle of large deficits, sort of like cycling the deficits and cycling how much time they spend on a break. So we prevent, obviously, metabolic adaptation, and that response to perhaps that crazy deficit being something that can affect their relationship with food, or binge eating, or provoke other consequences when we think about the consequences of dieting overall, and when we're thinking about body fat loss and these phases of fat loss that can compromise some people with the way they approach dieting. So that my question really is, how would you go about actually implementing those protocols for achieving that recomposition in a successful way, so the client not just loses the body fat, but they can actually maintain it over time once they get to their best physique?
Yeah. So personally, my preferred method is finding a sustainable deficit in the first place and just basically riding that until they have the momentum to do so. And then the way basically you brought up two things. One is the body recomp aspect. The other one is the maintenance of results and relationship with food and those things. So the second one, I mean, to me, that's a lot more important than body recomposition, because that's really something that you will have to deal with for the rest of your life. And the way I like to go about that is by actually communicating with the client during the actual fat loss itself. So then, like, while they are going through their deficit periods, then I just really I encourage them to be proactive, like communicate what's going on, and then actually giving them tools to make it more sustainable, and also to, I guess, reactively implement a lot of those things which they will regularly have to implement later once they are done with the diet anyway. So for example, social events or going out, like, okay, I've been doing well with this fat loss phase, but I have to attend this wedding or something, and then there will be a lot of food. And there I try to give them guidelines for, okay, like, maybe you've been on this diet so far, you were tracking your calories. Now you will be in this environment where that will be really tough and there will be some temptations. So, okay, like, let's have a game plan for that. And in a way, I'm actually glad when they have things like that coming up, because for one, I mean, it can be a nice break, just mentally doing something else, at least for a little bit. But secondly, it can be just very empowering to be able to actually handle those things and still be on track, or at least not regress a lot. So that's how I like to go about that. I don't like to go about it in like a pre-scheduled way where, like, okay, every X days or X weeks, we are going to have a different phase where you're doing something completely different. That is one way to do it. I think it has some downsides. but also potentially some benefits. Obviously, I think the downsides slightly outweigh it. Otherwise, I would do it myself that way. But then when it comes to the actual body recomp, then I again think that the sustainable deficit will win generally. You could do it in a cyclic way. The issue with that is, as you know, when you're transitioning between a deficit and then a maintenance phase or a surplus, like there's a bit of a lag time. Like you don't immediately, first of all, you don't even know what your maintenance or surplus calories are like right away. So like often it takes like a week to really figure it out because your body fluid shifts are doing crazy stuff and your hunger signals can be a bit weird as well. And then also, for example, you could make the argument that, okay, like I'm going to be in a deficit for, let's say 3 weeks, then on the 4th, I'm going to be at maintenance or in a slight surplus, then that could benefit my training. So maybe I could be doing a bit more volume, for example. But, your recovery status doesn't just flip over like all of a sudden from being in a deficit to now being in a surplus. So that has a bit of lag time as well. So because of these things, I think that it would just introduce like a lot more, I guess, just variables to manage and just would make it more difficult to oversee things. So I think a sustainable deficit, and sustainable is relative to the person. So for example, I brought up that client, like he was, it would be really hard to say a body fat, but like he was pretty obese. Hope that doesn't sound like pejorative statement or anything. Like he was, I don't know, over 30% body fat as a male, and he was probably not at the absolute highest deficit that he could have handled, because he could have been on like poverty macros basically at that point. Like he probably could have gotten by on like 1,200 calories. Probably he was eating something like 1,700 or something, which is a pretty big deficit still. And, that was still like more than enough for him to recomp. So there was no need for any kind of cycling really. So yeah, I just tend to go about it like linearly, go with a deficit that they can actually maintain, and then just really optimize the training as much as we can. And then it usually happens if the person has the potential for it.
I wanted to know from you, because you did share some of your story and your dieting history. Have you struggled with binge eating in the past? If you did, how have you dealt with it, and how were you able to overcome it?
Yeah, oh boy, did I struggle with that? That would be an understatement. Yeah, so it was the first time I got pretty lean. So the first time I got a six-pack for myself, I was probably like 10-ish% body fat. That's when it really started to hit me in a way where I could just no longer deny it, that this is something like I have an eating disorder, or at least my eating patterns are disordered. So this is just not healthy anymore. That's when I couldn't deny it anymore. Probably it was in the making for a long time by then, because I was always, for a very long time by then, I was always pursuing leanness. I was always trying to get leaner. So in some way, at least, my diet was always restrictive. And as you know, I don't know if you have experienced this yourself, but there's also such a thing as not actually being on a diet. So not being in a deficit, but mentally basically being on a diet, because like you might try to lose fat, and you might not, because you're overeating, you're cheating on your diet, whatever. So you're kind of just not yo-yoing, you're just stalling, you're not getting anywhere, but mentally you're always preoccupied with the whole thing. And that's been going on for a very long time for me by then. And at first it was just, maybe every once in a while I would kind of break down and I would overeat, and then I would kind of feel bad after that, physically and also mentally. But initially I would just kind of chalk it up to, well, I mean, I cheated on my diet, it happens to anyone. Then it started happening more frequently. Eventually it also happened when I was not even on a diet. I just realized that I was just unable to act like a quote unquote normal person when I was out with others. Like other people were enjoying each other's company in a restaurant, and I was just obsessed with how much more food can we get, because this is my chance. And as time has gone on, I mean, I hit some lows with this, which were, I mean, tragicomical. So I had some moments where I almost like paused and I just like looked up and I'm like, wow, like I really hit rock bottom with this. Like, what the hell am I doing here? So like, I told these stories on some podcasts, so I can just quickly share some random stuff. But at one point I was actually like fishing out food from a trash bin, which I like threw out before, because I was like, okay, I'm done binging. So I went upstairs, and then later I realized like, oh, actually I could continue this. So I went down and like I fished out what I threw out. And yeah, in those moments I was like, man, how the hell did I get here? This is crazy. And at one point I was just really not sure if I can actually get out of this on my own. And I was really considering reaching out for professional help, which maybe I should have done. I think a lot of people perhaps should do that. The reason why I didn't do it is because I just didn't trust, I guess, that I could find someone who would actually understand what's going on. And I've interacted with some people who tried reaching out for professional help, which I still think is a good idea. But at times, you might go to a therapist or something, or maybe even an eating disorder specialist that is just not familiar with the psychology of, lifters and people that are interested in the stuff that we are interested in. So I was just skeptical that I could actually find someone. So I was kind of just hanging tight. Eventually, so I guess the timeline of me getting out of this, or the sequence of events, was, at first I just decided that I'm just going to stop caring a little bit. Like, I'm just going to basically not give a shit whether I'm gaining weight or getting leaner. I'm just going to basically do whatever I want. And that resulted in me still occasionally binging, but at the same time, it was not as, like, I didn't have that sort of guilt element in it as much anymore. So maybe I stopped these overeating bouts a little bit sooner than I did before. So maybe now I just overate, but then I didn't have that moment where I'm like, man, I kind of feel sick and super full, but now I feel so guilty that now I will have to go on a crash diet tomorrow. So I might as well eat even more until I'm like really, really sick. Now I didn't do that anymore, at least. And then, because I no longer had this really strong focus on always trying to get leaner, I had to fill that void with something else. So I just looked for something that I could do in my free time. And then I started using Tinder, and I went on some dates. Nothing really remarkable to tell you there. It's just like I was looking for another outlet. And that was very useful, because that's sort of just, being with another person, like going out, having a meal with someone, and then just chatting. And like that made me realize that, wow, like it's actually worth like doing something else as well. Like maybe there is a motivation to actually try to get through this and to not let myself sink in this completely. Yeah. And
quick question. When you say that you sort of stopped caring or paying so much attention to whether you gain some weight or not, what were the things you were doing in addition to that? So did you stop tracking? Did you stop weighing yourself? What were the strategies you were implementing to kind of keep you on track, but at the same time reduce the likelihood for you to be so fixated on your physique that would lead you to go on a diet or reduce your calories and then get back on the same cycle?
Yeah, I think that's when I first attempted to not track, and probably, so I kind of did it in a half-assed way. So like sometimes I wouldn't track, but then occasionally I would still kind of add up the numbers. Really, I think the biggest component was that I stopped planning to get leaner like very soon. So up until that point, it was always like I wanted to be at, I don't know, 10% body fat or something. And then maybe my plan would have been to, okay, be at 10% body fat, then go on this lean bulk and then, bulk until maybe 15% body fat, then cut back down to 10. And then finally I could go through this like idealized cut and bulk bodybuilding, diet cycle, I guess. So there was always in the back of my head that that's the plan. And currently I'm at whatever 16 or 17% body fat. So I need to fix this first. And then I was like, no, like I'm just going to let this go for now. Not because it was not important, but it's because I was so sick of just trying and repeating this cycle. And I was just so sick and tired of always feeling this way that I just basically, as a matter of just brute force, it was forced upon me to stop caring about this just for a little bit at least. And that resulted in me just eating with a bit more freedom, and probably quite a few times I ended up still in a hefty surplus. But honestly, that I think looking back, that mattered a lot less than actually just, so being in a surplus, but not overeating in this compulsive manner was still a big win, because, you might be at 17% body fat, which might not be where you want to be at that time, but it's still just a snapshot. Like you can get back down anytime to 10% body fat if your eating habits are good for the most part. Then that's something that's always in your control. That's in your hands. But if your eating habits are completely messed up, like they were for me, then you could be at 9% body fat, and it's just a matter of time until you eventually like your mind just gives out and you blow back up to however much body fat percentage, which you don't want to do. So yeah, I think it was still a big positive. And I think that's how it started. That was the first important step. The second important step was to actually like do something else, like move out of my comfort zone a bit and to explore the world outside of the gym and my kitchen, basically. And basically that ended up with me meeting, well, then girl that I dated for a bit, now my wife. And that was like a hugely life-changing moment, because that basically just took all of that, which I just mentioned, to the next level. Like I was like, wow, like life can be like this good outside of these things, like binging in the kitchen, or at least like stuffing myself with some low calorie foods at best, and working out. Like some other cool stuff are happening here as well. And then I was like, okay, so like I need to get out of this rut, not just the overeating and not just not being as lean as I want. Like who cares about that? But like I cannot let food control my life this much. Like that cannot be the center of my life, basically, because it has been up until that point. And that's when I actually like really deliberately stopped tracking calories and macros, because that was something I just haven't tried up until that point. And we can talk about what came after that, but that's basically a new chapter after that for me.
That's great. And now that you mentioned that you pretty much, or would you say you overcame binging completely, or do you still have sometimes certain episodes when you try to go on a cut again and reduce your body fat? Do you get tempted to sometimes get crazy about food, or you already have that completely controlled and overcome?
So I would say that I overcame it in the sense that I did not have those horrendous blowouts like I did before. I've had times when I overate, but that was a deliberate choice. So I wanted to overeat because it was fun, and that's completely fine.
And
I did not have
like guilt in that moment. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. I would say I had one. So I had like two little low points since then. One was, so I did a photo shoot in 2019 where I got the leanest that I've ever gotten. And it was just a very stressful period in many ways. And that cut that I did for that photo shoot, it kind of compromised not just my own well-being, but also like my relationship with my significant other. And yeah, after that, I was just not at my best self, or I guess I was not in full control of my mind, I could say. And after that, I had a couple of not all out binges like I did before, but I had some where I was like, man, like this was pretty messed up what you just did here. And I had some guilt after that. And also during COVID, when it first hit, then I was just like kind of in a mild depressive state, because I was just so bummed by the whole thing that everything like shut down, the uncertainty of how long it's going to last and everything. So then I had a few where it was like, man, like this is, what the hell are you doing? And then I felt a bit guilty as well. But for the most part, that's something that I always kept under control. And I did not have these like guilty, like binges with a guilty feeling afterwards, or binges that were made out to be worse binges because I was feeling guilty and I was just like binging out of frustration. I did not have those, which to me is a huge deal. So I would say, like, I could say on paper, or I could stand in front of the jury and say with a straight face that I overcame binge eating, but I would say that I keep it under control. And I think I will always be a person with disordered eating who is symptom free, basically, just like an alcoholic. If you ask them, yeah, I may have not drank a sip of alcohol in 10 years, but I'm an alcoholic. That's how they are referring to themselves often. So that's kind of how I'm viewing it, because I know that if I let go of my good habits, then I think all of these bad stuff could return at any time.
Yeah. And I think it is always tricky, especially when we think about changing our body composition and deciding whether it is a priority at that point in time, whether you're actually ready. Like, is it the right time? Am I ready? Do I feel like am I at risk to going back to those behaviors that I had previously? That's one of the reasons actually that I haven't decided to do a bodybuilding competition or like get very, very lean, because I had a background or a history of bulimia in the past when I was younger. And my fear is, I was so obsessed to be lean because I was a public figure. I was a sports dietitian that everyone would look up to. And like, who is going to follow the plan of a dietitian who doesn't even care about herself? Like if you don't look in a certain way, like that was my strong belief in the past. If you don't look a certain way, people are not going to have credibility on you. They're not going to believe in what you do or what you preach. So I was so obsessed about and depending so much on my physique to show who I was and the capacity that I had to not just being a dietitian, but also look, I know what I'm talking about. Look at me. But that is the same fear that comes sometimes once I overcame that eating disorder. My eating and my relationship with food was so much better. And at the moment it's so good that I start thinking about whether being too lean is actually something I want to do, that might risk the stability I have now and things can come back. As you mentioned, you had an eating disorder, and if you had it before, it could come back easily at any time if you are not careful or if you start displaying the behaviors that you used to use before that led to that behavior. So it is very tricky, and you want to know how to go about it and really think about whether you need to do it, whether that is a priority, and whether you're going to be ready and you're going out strategy when you finish, or in the meantime you're doing that. How are you going to overcome these thoughts or these behaviors or these feelings if this comes up? Because once you reach a very lean physique and more, and I don't know for men, but for females, it is really difficult to then reverse diets or get into a surplus again, or going back to a higher calories and lose that shredded or very lean physique that you achieve in a period of time. So that is a very, very delicate and tricky component that I find many people, many women and men struggle with.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And so I think there are multiple components to that. And I think the easy cases are where the only thing is making that difficult is just the hunger and the little bit slightly increased food focus that inevitably comes at the end of every diet. Because if that's the only issue and otherwise the person is, I guess, just mentally ready to transition out of a diet well, then it's relatively easily solvable. Like basically it's just like, look, like you're going to be a little bit hungry initially, but it's quickly going to flip over. Just let's increase calories, so you will be fine. And I've had very mixed experiences with people. To me personally, this is perhaps my biggest challenge to this day. Like everything comes more easily than this. Let's just put it that way. And I think for a lot of people, and again, I can empathize with them because this is something that was very true of me for most of my life. I would say that the reason why this is so hard is because like they have a very, I guess, just non-healthy relationship with food at the time, by the time they even begin their diet. And basically being on a fat loss diet, even though that makes it even harder to have a healthy relationship with food, but at the same time, that clear goal and that motivation that goal gives them is one of the few things that can, I guess, just allow them to keep it together for a little bit. So they are able to arrest all of those disordered tendencies that they have. But once that diet is done with, and now it's time to go back to just eating, quote, normally, all of a sudden, without that goal, there is nothing that still motivates them to, or maybe motivates them is not even the right word. I guess it's more so a closely felt and very obvious incentive. Let's just put it that way. So when you know that, okay, like if I mess up today, if I overeat or if I binge, that means that I'm going to get to my goal physique a week later or 2 weeks later. Like that's something that you feel it on your skin. If the incentive to not binge is that, well, I mean, you could maintain this physique for the next 10 years if you don't do this regularly, or like slowly your physique is going to erode a bit. Like that's like a very like long-term thing, which you don't feel on your skin as much. And so it's just very hard. Like they are done with the diet and it's basically like, well, what now? And I think for a lot of people, basically there is no in between. Because just eating normally and not being hungry, that's actually not that's not a pleasant state for them, because the only thing they actually enjoy is being like super hedonic with things and having the occasional binges, even though the binges are not like enjoyable. Like afterwards you feel guilty and everything, but still like you have that initial thrill when you begin a binge and an overeating bout. So that is what you enjoy. And if I'm not going to do that, then I might as well diet, because it sucks anyway. Then I might as well get leaner in the process. So yeah, it's very tricky.
I do have a question about something that you have mentioned previously, and I think you're very passionate about this topic as well, which is body fat set point, and how do you modify it, how you lower it, how you actually know that what is your body fat set point, and being able to have a pretty good idea about where do you settle and how much is too much and how much is too little, how much is worth to push things when trying to get leaner. So what is your stance on body fat set point? What is actually a body fat set point, and how do you actually go about it?
Yeah, that's a cool topic, because there was a lot of interesting talks about it over the years. And like these days, as you probably know, like we usually refer to this as a settling point, because it's definitely, even if there is such a thing as a set point, it's not like one specific body fat percentage, but the idea is that your body
like
basically wants. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So your body basically has a certain composition and weight and also fatness or leanness that it likes, quote unquote. And if you deviate from that too much, then it basically like nudges you back to that point, either by making you more hungry or less hungry, or more and less energetic and fidgety. And yeah, it is a range. So like for example, I know for myself that basically like anything between about maybe like 90 and around like 83-ish kilos, my body is pretty happy like being there. And if I go outside of that range, it's not an instantaneous thing. So it's not like, okay, I'm not 83 kilos, but 82. It's not like everything flips drastically, but like, yeah, it's like at this point, I'm noticeably more food focused. I'm not as cheerful, not as often. Maybe my sleep suffers a little bit. And then basically each kilo below that, it's like an exponential change. And then the same thing over 90 kilos. Like it's not like I go to 91 kilos and like, holy shit, like everything is completely different. But I do notice that I'm a bit like even less interested in food. I have some weird things, like I sweat more while I'm eating, and some not so pleasant things. So, but it's a gradual thing and it's a range. And I think, so it's very interesting, because obviously one thing that will determine this strongly is the person's appetite. So some people will just basically eat a fraction of the food that I would, and they feel super full. And I look at what they ate and I'm like, how are you full from that? Like it's crazy. And then I've seen some people, not that many, but I have seen some people where they eat an amount of food, which like, I know if I eat that, I will feel super stuffed, and I can eat a lot of food. So that's quite a lot. And they will eat like 2 or 3 more portions like that. Well, actually one of them is Menno. You had him on your show a couple of times. Like I've been in the same sushi restaurant as he was, and I could just not believe it. Like I could not move anymore. And he still ordered these giant plates of sushi. So that's a uniquely large appetite, for example, and that's definitely going to influence things. But as you can see in the case of Menno, for example, it doesn't necessarily mean that a high appetite means that you will settle at a high point, but it does mean that you will have to manage things more closely. So if you have, yeah, exactly. So if you're someone with a large appetite, like I would classify myself as such for the most part, it's still very doable to be leaner, but it just requires more thoughtfulness. So maybe if I was happy hanging around at maybe 20% body fat or so for the most part, I wouldn't have to invest too much thought into how my meals are going to look like each day. I would just wake up, eat when I'm hungry, and pretty much just eat whatever, so long as they're reasonable choices. And that's for each meal. Eating out is not a big stressor, because like, yeah, I might overeat, but I know I will be less hungry and I will just naturally eat less in the next meals and the day after. If I wanted to be leaner, so in the last like 6-7 months, I stayed actually pretty lean, and so it was fine. I was not hungry, I was not struggling, but like each meal, there was like a deliberate, conscious decision or some serious planning before that. So it doesn't have to be a big decision then. So if you're willing to take on that extra bit of mental energy that you will have to invest, then you can stay very, very lean, even if you have a big appetite and you're not a naturally skinny person. But a lot of people just don't want to invest that mental energy in, which I don't blame them for, because I mean, it does take time and it does take energy. And then go ahead.
And I was going to say, and I guess it would just need to be conscious or either in either side of the equation of the calories in, calories out. So if you want to be leaner and you want to eat more, you either have to eat more higher thermic effect food, like foods like have a protein or more fiber, more volume, lower calories, so you can feed more volume and you feel more satiated, or mentally you feel like you ate more food. Whereas if you feel like that is not necessarily an option, or maybe you need to work with the other side of the equation as well. So maybe you have to be more conscious about your needs, your daily steps, your consistency with training and resistance training and your cardio. So you have a decent amount of calories in and calories out being equated, and being able to manage that and still increase your calories and intake. So I guess it is just being more thoughtful about, well, if I want to eat more, there is a trade-off. I will need to be more active if I don't want to gain weight, or I need to eat more of the foods that are going to potentially not be as hedonic or very high energy, high calories, but more lower energy, more nutrient dense, and more volumetric. So I can feel mentally that I'm actually eating more food, and it kind of feels like I am actually eating.
Yeah. And I mean, it's really, I had a video on this last spring, like May or so. And I basically graded like 7 aspects of my life and how those changed since I was around 10% body fat. And I gave a score to each of them, like from 1 to 10. And the end result was that it's actually really not that bad. Like all in all, it was like an 8 out of 10 for the whole thing. And the biggest thing was just like, yeah, I'm just less flexible. Like I just need to be more attentive more often. And if you're okay with that, then this is very doable. It's really how lean you want to stay is largely a matter of like what you're willing to sacrifice. And for the most part, like you won't have to sacrifice being hungry all the time. Like that's probably not going to happen if you manage things well, but managing things well is going to be a bit more effort and time intensive.
I agree. And now when we think about body fat set point, it's not the same when we have that same conversation on someone who is very large or has a lot of body fat to lose, whereas someone who is very lean, perhaps the body fat set point is more manageable. But how do we go about modifying that body fat set point on someone that needs to lose 100 pounds, and they have been used to being around a very heavy weight, a high body fat, they eat 5,000 calories a day, and for them that's the normal. And now how do we go about changing that set point? And then once you have lost about 100 pounds, you're very out of your comfort zone for if you have spent a long time in a very large body. How do we go about modifying that to now you're 100 pounds lower? How can we keep as much as possible the new version of yourself without risking it and getting back to your old version?
Yeah, and that is the $1 million question. And I think I have a reasonably good answer, but it's obviously something to acknowledge that there will be some people who actually have some really unfortunate genetic cards that they picked out as far as appetite regulation and just the hedonic response that they get to food. So like maybe you and I would get like a 7 out of 10 like pleasure response if we eat something really tasty, and they would get like a 20 out of 10 response, like it's off the charts. And so it's going to make it trickier. But I think for the most part, like the biggest barrier for someone who put on a lot of weight is like having gotten accommodated to a certain way of eating and certain flavor profiles, very tasty foods, and just a certain, basically an over reliance on food as a means of attaining hedonic pleasure. And I think getting out of that. So I think the first biggest step, which is why a lot of people don't succeed in losing the weight in the first place, is just kind of getting started and getting through that large initial hump where the person is just feeling like, man, like this is how life is going to be. Like I've been eating, pizza and ice cream and these things, and now I'm eating this, chicken and whatever, and it tastes like cardboard. Though like that thing takes some time to change. And an aggressive diet, actually like going into a large deficit initially, can actually speed that process up a little bit, because, as you probably know, if you're hungry and if you're leaner, your appetite or your taste preference expands a little bit. Like you start appreciating these like blender tastes more. But still, it's going to be obviously a long process. Obviously, losing the weight itself, like the psychological makeup of that process is also a tricky one to manage, because you're just not going to see like incredible results really fast, because like you have so much to lose that it might take a few months before you first think to yourself that, wow, like I've come a long way, this is amazing. And then I think that actually if they are succeeding with the diet, and it was not some liquid diet or something like that, but it was actually like a reasonably well managed diet with nutritious foods and things like that, there's a good chance that by the end of that, their taste preferences will have changed to a decent degree, and their habits will have reshaped to enough of a degree to where they don't have that huge pull anymore to gravitate back to those old habits. Of course, we know that that still happens to a lot of people. And I think in that case, their environment has a huge role to play in that. Also, probably just having the right instructions. So if you have a competent coach guiding you through that, then that person is going to help you to find those strategies once you're there, like as opposed to someone who completes The Biggest Loser or something like that. And then, like they crash dieted and exercise like 5 hours a day, but then they're just like left on their own, like, there you go on your own. Now you're out in the open world, and then all hell breaks loose. But yeah, I think that if you actually go through a long diet as a really overweight person, and you followed something that actually makes sense and is smartly put together, I think there is a decent chance that you will have actually learned something on the way down. And then you won't need like a huge intervention strategy again to prevent you from going back to those things. But of course, it's going to be still hard.
You mentioned something that's really, really important there. That is the time that takes you to get there is not just wasted, but you're utilizing it to learn skills, to change your habits, to modify your mindset, to change the behaviors that have led you to that body weight in the first place, and modifying that along the way, and learning the skills to cope with emotional eating in a different way, that you're not utilizing food if it's something that you were used to, modifying your exercise and your physical activity, and learning new habits that are going to stay with you when you reach that weight, that you can utilize them then to maintain what you achieved. And if you're able to maintain those new behaviors, those are going to help you to achieve and maintain what you achieved now. Prevents, obviously, regaining the weight in the first place. So that is kind of the way I see someone succeeding and keep it off the weight they lost.
Yeah, definitely. It's also a very long process, and it's something that's going to keep getting better the longer you actually stick to those habits. So, now when I was maintaining this leaner physique, after 2 months, I thought that, wow, like I have settled, like this is as good as it's going to get. And then 4 months in, I was like, wow, like it definitely feels a lot easier than it did 2 months ago. And then 6 months in, I was like, wow, like, okay, I want to go on like this lean bulk or something. And it's really hard to let go of these behaviors because I've just gotten so used to them. So yeah, and like just keep that in mind, that even if you think that it's hard, like a month later, once you've gotten leaner, it's gonna get easier the longer you keep it up.
Now, let me ask you one question that I think that is going to help us to sort of close this conversation. When it comes to thinking back on the things you wish you would have learned, and someone would have told you when you started the journey of modifying your body composition and fitness, what would you like to hear or learn at that point, and advice you would have liked to have told in the first place to not make the mistakes you've made over the course of a few years?
Yeah, it's funny, actually. I'm always laughing when like this question being asked on podcasts, like the guest always gives some really shitty answer, like, I wouldn't change anything, like, because then I wouldn't have gotten to where I am today. And it's like, come on, dude, thank you, that was great answer. But no, yeah, so as far as the practical side of things is concerned, with training, it would have been amazing to just know like a couple of like really fundamental things, like, okay, like this is what you should pay attention to. So get stronger over time. That's a really good sign that things are heading in the right direction. The magic rep range doesn't exist. So anything between like 5 and 20 is good. It just comes down to practical stuff, which one you pick. That the number of sets is the most practical way to track your training volume. Like don't calculate training tonnage and things like this. So like those are just a few like practical things. I'm only saying this because like I drove myself just insane in the first couple of years, like trying every training method under the sun because I was looking for the magic bullet. As far as the dieting, the food side of things, I guess I just wish if someone had told me at the time to just wait until you try to get like really lean, because it's not going to be as exciting when you get there as you think initially, because like you know, like you need some size at first to make a lean physique look good. So you're going to be better off just eating and training for the first couple of years, then maybe actually try to do like a very serious cut. That would have been great. And then maybe also if I could have gotten some philosophical advice on all of this, that look, like you're going to be lifting for the rest of your life. Ideally, like you have all the time to implement all the hardcore stuff. But when it comes to food, it has a serious impact on how you conduct everything basically in your life. Like it impacts your social life, your family life, romantic relationships, everything basically. Like just maybe just enjoy yourself a bit more because you're a young dude. Just you know, enjoy this. This is a cool time that's never going to return. And honestly, I just wish I had enjoyed myself a bit more, you know, in my early 20s, especially because I wasted away a lot of opportunities, like always trying to be super on point with things. And now, honestly, the things that I think back to the most fondly were not the times when I hit my macros perfectly, but all those cool things that I experienced in social situations, you know, adventures, traveling, things like that. So I wish someone could have just opened my eyes to all of those things a lot more. It would have had to be a really good speech if someone was going to do that, because I know I would have been very stubborn. But yeah, and I think that that's something I'm kind of trying to convey to a lot of people who reach out to me with like these cut or bulk questions, like, what do you think is my body fat? What do you think I should do? And I see, like, I can see it on their face and on their skin, like, this is a young dude. And I'm like, man, I don't think this is the right time to be doing this. Like, first of all, you're maybe even growing still. So like, don't cut seriously now. Just train, nourish yourself. Then in a couple of years, then maybe think about these things more seriously. But yeah, I guess that would be something I really wish someone could have done for me at the time.
When you were younger, or I don't know, do you think was in your head to think about utilizing performance enhancing drugs or steroids when you were younger? Were you tempted to do it? Did you use them at some point? How was your experience with that? Because I know, especially for a lot of folks and young guys that want to change their body composition, get very tempted to use these shortcuts to get leaner, to get stronger, to look very shredded. That is very available in many places, especially in gyms when you're surrounded by a lot of guys, new people, new PTs. So how was your experience, or did you ever have anything to do in relation to the steroids?
So not yet. And it's interesting because I know that the evolution of a lot of people in this regard is that they are very interested in it in the beginning, maybe, and they are very tempted, and they may or may not actually take the plunge. And then later they solidify their natural identity, and then they say like, okay, like, I'm glad I didn't do it. For me, honestly, it didn't even really cross my mind for most of my training career. And interestingly, now that I'm like a lot more advanced and I hit most of those benchmarks that I wanted to hit, as far as like how lean I get, how strong I get in the gym, like all of these things, I just like, it just became a more interesting topic for me, if anything. So because of course it is very interesting. I mean, come on, like we have something which is inducing a chemical reaction in the body, which is like making all of those things that we try to do more effective. Like, of course, that is interesting. And I would say I would consider it. So I'm not against it in really like in any kind of ethical way, unless you're like cheating in sports or something like that. But of course, like it would have to be a very well informed decision. Like, and it's hard to be really well informed because each individual person's genetics is different. So like you would never know how your health would degrade or not degrade if you did it. So it would be a very big decision. But if anything, I'm more interested in it now than I was when I was younger. I was always interested in finding the magic bullet, of course, but I think I just tuned into the right channels earlier who were maybe like even overplaying the risks of these performance enhancing drugs. So I was like just super scared of it. And actually for really silly reasons, if I think back, like I wasn't even that afraid of getting a heart attack or whatever. I was more afraid of like getting a bunch of acne and things like that, which is not the biggest problem with them. But yeah, that's pretty much my story with PEDs.
My last question would be around you do have a podcast, or you have a podcast, or do you still run your podcast? What have been the most special guests or conversations you have had in the past with your podcast that left you with some particular learning or takeaways that you have applied in your life once you had that conversation with that person?
Ooh, yeah. I had many that were influential. I mean, I loved all of the conversations with Menno. They were never as popular, those episodes, as I thought they would be, but I think all of those were really good as well. Norwegian strength coach. I don't know if you had him on. I think not, right?
No, no. Maybe I will ask you to give me some of your contacts so I can probably get them on my show.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. No, that would be awesome if you had him on. Yeah, he always shared some unique wisdom. Like I remember that the first time I talked with him, I was just like sitting there for a while, just kind of like staring in front of myself, because we talked a bit at the end about like happiness and the things that really matter in life and stuff like that. And like even now I thought about it, like I actually got chills, because it was like, yeah, that was one of those moments where I really felt even stronger about the fact that like I want to contribute to this industry in some way, because I could just see that there's a lot more to this than being a personal trainer in a gym, which is also great, but there are just more options. And so that was very influential. I had a podcast with Dr. Stefan Guyenet. You know who is? He wrote the book The Hungry Brain and another one as well. That's an older podcast of mine that I really liked. Also not very underrated. Like it was actually like he shared a lot of cool stuff there. And then like I had those roundtables, which I'm maybe like the most, I guess, proud of, just because mainly it's just down to these guys being so nice that they would take the time to do them. But like still, when you have a Mike Israetel and Eric Helms on for 2 hours, that's like, you can't help but feel like a boss. Like, God damn it, see what I can pull off here. So yeah, those are I guess, the kindest to my heart. But so yeah.
I know you have also in your podcast James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits. Is that right?
Yeah, James Clear. Yeah. Oh yeah, that was a really cool episode as well. Very, very underrated. Maybe it doesn't even have like 1,000 views, but one of my favorites. Yeah.
Oh, I definitely was going to ask you about that one, because he did write this book. It's been so popular. I think especially in the past 2 years, that I think because of that new focus on modifying your habits and behaviors to do something about your health. So I think that is definitely one that is underrated for sure.
Yeah, no, and James that was awesome, because I asked a lot of questions of him that I listened to a lot of podcasts with him from before, and I always wanted other people to ask those questions, but they didn't. So I was like really glad to be able to ask them. And he like that's definitely one of the best personal development books out there. Like most of them, I used to be a big personal development book reader, and then I kind of just like decided that, man, like these books kind of suck. Like it's just like basically like one sentence that's like really valuable, and then 500 sentences that are just fillers. And James's book was like value the whole way through. So that's definitely a very, very good book.
And is there anyone that you'd like to get on your podcast that you haven't talked to before?
Oh yeah, definitely. I wanted to have Cal Newport on, who is I don't know if you know his work. He wrote a book called Deep Work, which became also like a big hit in the like personal development space, and also like the entrepreneur space, because it's like deep work. Like basically most of the value of that book is in the title, like work deeply without being distracted, and that's gonna be good. So like from the fitness space, I would be interested in having on Michelle May, or Michelle, right? What was the name of the book? Am I Hungry? Or Yeah, your podcast with her was awesome. I really liked that one. So I would love
It was
to.
a battle. It was a battle with her because she's very anti-diet. It was
Yeah,
like, how do I manage to really get her into a very neutral space that we can talk about mindless eating, mindful eating, binge eating, and still, because I explain as well, I am in the fitness industry and I'm surrounded by challenges of dieting and like reducing your body fat, and that is something that seems to be okay, but it just depends on where you're at in your life and what is your dieting history, how's your relationship with food to begin with, and like, but is I find that there is a lot of people that they have really great stuff to talk about, but they are very extreme in their position. They're very strong on where they stand, so it's a bit of a
yeah.
challenge. Yeah,
Yeah. No, I had the same. Like you did a really good job, I think, in like kind of not like you basically addressed the important points, and like you didn't have to avoid like certain questions because like maybe then you would talk about fat loss or whatever. So it was like productive, but at the same time, so you avoided conflict, but then you also like didn't make it like overly like I guess like neutral questions that like couldn't possibly cause a conflict. So it was good, but yeah, that's tricky when someone is like having a very strong position, and that's my issue oftentimes with that the intuitive eating space, that they are just I love their overall message, but then they go so hard against like fat loss in any way that
yeah,
yeah, I think in general, like when you really strongly position yourself with something like very radically, that usually leads to not good things.
yeah, I agree completely. Well,
Yeah.
I think we had such a great conversation. I appreciate that you
Yeah.
came on and you were able to have a chat with me on everything on, like, I think we talked about so much stuff.
It was a lot of fun chatting with you, and I'm also glad we met face to face.
Awesome. Well, you have a great day and I will talk to you very soon.